adopted remote participation policy.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. I think we need a roll call vote on this.
Yes, Ms. Friedlander,
Yes.
Mr. Krasner,
Yes.
Mr. Puentes,
Yes.
Ms. Comont,
Yes.
Mr. Stevens.
Yes.
And Mr. Hyra.
Yes.
Our motion moves. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Thank you, Mr. Duncan, for joining remotely. We have a couple items on the agenda, pretty light, but we have the work session items later. Do we have a motion to approve the agenda?
So moved.
Second?
Moved and seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
Aye.
Item 5, receipt of petitions. Mr. Turner, do we have any written correspondence?
We did receive one piece of written correspondence from community member Mike Economu regarding the recently submitted site plan for South Maple and Annandale regarding bicycle facilities as well. So that
And we have not seen that yet, so we will deliberate that.
that'll be coming, yeah, in a future date.
Item 5B, do we have any in-person petitions?
Mr. Chair, just one quick follow-up comment. I just wanted to acknowledge Mr. Economou's letter and to express my support for the items that he raises in that letter. So hopefully it will generate some useful discussion.
Important things. I know we'll have it up on our agenda soon. Any other petitions?
None in person, Mr. Chair.
Item 6, action items. We don't have any, so we'll move on to our work session with the Yassini Jewelers Site Plan Work Session. Mr. Stoddard.
Thank you, Chair. Members of the Commission, I'm happy to introduce the item before I turn it over to our case planner on this, Mr. Jeff Hollern, for our staff report. This item is a by right site plan application for a reuse of for a repurposing of the property at the corner of Broad and Falls Avenue in front of the Birch and Broad shop, or near the Birch and Broad Shopping Center. This is, as I said, it's a by right site plan application. This is your first work session on the application. Of course, staff has reviewed the materials submitted to date in detail, and I'll let Jeff Hollern walk through the staff review, and then the applicant's architect is also here and available to make a presentation tonight.
Good evening, Chair Puentes and the members of the Planning Commission. I'm Jeff Hollern with the planning staff. As Paul had mentioned, tonight serves as an introductory work session for the Planning Commission to review a proposed site plan for a new Yassini Jewelers store at the corner of West Broad and Falls Avenue. The project includes the demolition of the former Capital One Bank and to replace its 1,700 square foot ground floor footprint with a new location. As of the most recent submission, the applicant has not requested any waivers or variances as part of their application. The proposed development is a permitted by right use in a B3 general business district and is consistent with the land use vision of the city's comprehensive plan. Line 84 to 164 of the staff report includes a more detailed staff analysis of the project against the comprehensive plan, the West End small area plan, the design guidelines, and the streetscape standards. But notable recommendations for this area include the promotion and redevelopment which incorporates vibrant retail as part of an attractive walkable gateway into the city and builds upon a sense of place through consistent streetscape and materials. To date, staff has reviewed 2 submissions of the site plan for compliance with city codes, policies, and regulations. In the first review of the application materials, staff had identified several instances of missing necessary information or proposed site features that would require waivers of site plan requirements in order to be recommended for approval. The applicant's second submission reduced the number of these missing items, but did not address several others, including adding a list of requested waivers. In some cases, required information was removed from the previous submittal. Notable staff identified waivers may include, but are not limited to, a 5% interior parking lot landscaping, perimeter parking lot landscaping adjacent to public streets and to abutting properties, and a potential parking reduction of approximately 12%. Staff comments on the second submission of materials were transmitted to the applicant this past Friday, February 16th, upon the completion of our review. Attachment 2B within your materials has been updated to include comments received since the publication of the staff report. That's all for me. We do, as Paul had mentioned, we do have the architect in-house with us. We also have a couple of folks, I believe, online that can talk about the project. So, thank you.
Thank you. Do we want to hear from the architect? We have comments for the
Questions for staff first, maybe? Questions for staff? Can I ask?
Please.
Mr. Allen, can you summarize the waivers that they're asking for? It's in the report, but I think it'd be helpful if you went through
So,
it.
so right now, the applicant themselves have not requested any waivers.
But you identified certain things that,
We have identified
Right.
certain things that,
Yeah.
certain site features that would need waivers. Most of it is, I think, stemming from the project being proposed as being a demolition versus a renovation. The project is a demolition, meaning that they will have to follow the same rules and requirements for buffers and things like that throughout the site versus a renovation, which, may have these things, I guess, grandfathered into them. So what staff has seen through our first and second review is that there is typically a 5% parking lot interior landscaping feature that is not included in their application so far. And then second, that there would be landscape buffers along Falls Avenue and the northern and western property lines that are also not included as part of their application. Also, the calculated parking reduction, if I remember correctly, required parking spaces is, I believe, 17 for this site, and they're providing 15. So I think that comes out to be about 12%
okay.
of a reduction.
And just to clarify, I mean, just the way you phrased it, there's not a disagreement between staff and the applicant on whether or not a waiver is needed. You're just saying they haven't identified it on the plan.
No, I mean, we included that we would like to see waivers. We identified the waivers in the first round, and we have that in our list of comments. And then when typically we receive the comments back in the second submission with their responses, and it was not addressed one way or the other. So we don't have a response.
Okay,
There's not a disagreement, we just don't have a response, that's all.
okay.
So,
All right, thank you for that.
Good question. Any other questions from the commission?
I'll wait till later.
Okay.
Just one quick item, just for staff. In that I did pick up that there's a difference between the application and the square footage from the application to the application in the parking requirements square footage. It's just a difference of like 200 square feet, but it might bump that required parking up one if you're rounding up.
can you just tell me, just so I can...
Yeah, so the application states that the square footage is 4,420 square feet, but line 214 of the staff report identifies that it's 4,220. So it's probably the delta of one parking spot, which seems minimal, but it's better to like keep just the numbers tracking through, tick and tie. Okay, cool, thank you.
Good catch. Anything else? Okay. Over to you.
Here we go. I am Hamid Mumni. I am the architect of the project. In regard of parking spaces, we had originally 18 parking spaces, but we had to take 2 to provide a trash enclosure. And as you know, a jewelry store doesn't use a huge space for trash. So we are working on reducing that trash enclosure to just 1 parking space and provide 16 instead of 17. So we'll be missing 1. That's for the parking, providing the required parking. For the waiver for the landscaping, we are planning to do it and submit it with our next submission.
So to staff's comment, so there isn't disagreement on any of the, it's
No,
just
we are just
procedural.
working on it, and we're going to submit all the required waivers. Yeah, we just got the comments last week, and we have our team working on it, and we are planning to submit in about 2 weeks. We'll submit the waivers and the revised drawings.
I think we'll all agree, I mean, it's a good use of the space and interesting looking designs. I think we're all interested to see something happen there, but going through the process and doing what we got to do is, I think, clearly seems to be
Sure,
what the delay
absolutely.
is now. Any other comments then from the commission? Start here.
Yeah, I have a few. Hi. Could you talk a little bit about how the space will be used? So they're going up to 4,000 square feet, which is quite a bit larger than the current store, right?
Yes.
So how is that space going to be used?
Well, the current store that they have on Falls Plaza doesn't have a shop for repair. And they have to send it to Chicago, where is the main office, to do all the repairs. So their project is to have a local shop for repair here, and also expanding the showroom because their business is expanding.
Great, that's helpful.
This is a family business. They have currently 8 locations, 3 in suburb of Chicago, and they have also Virginia, Wisconsin, Florida, and North Carolina. This will be the store number 9.
That's helpful with context, thank you. I'm just thinking about the parking requirements, and I know there's sort of like a flat, it's a 250 square feet, but, you know, some of it is going to be actual showroom where you would have customers, and some of it is sort of back of the house kind of jewelry repair. So I'm just wondering, as we're thinking about that, if we're, you know, I feel like there would be different parking requirements depending on the use. I don't know that the tables that we have get that detailed, so maybe we just have to apply that 250. But I'm just wondering if you all had discussed that, how the building is going to be used.
Yeah, it's mostly just at this point, it's been calculated through the, like you said, the code says 250 square feet of gross floor area.
Yeah,
when-
and that's as detailed as it gets.
And that's as detailed as it gets, unfortunately. I know in other cases, like things like restaurants, we've done, you know, customer area. So that maybe could be a case here that we'd have to kind of talk that over with the zoning and also, I guess, you know, maybe include that as part of our discussion about, you know, parking waivers should they be requested, so.
Yep, that sounds good. I had a,
We're not at that stage, just because we haven't had that conversation.
They haven't been
Yeah.
formally requested. Yeah.
but they may not need to be depending on how we're counting. I mean, I guess if you have to count it gross floor area, then,
Yeah, I understand, but I think given the size of this site, one thing that we really want to make sure is, you know, if these buffers are provided, these landscape buffers, that might push in a little bit onto the parking lot.
Right,
So
exactly.
the number that we have now may change. You know, it might get even less. So we don't really know until we're able to, see how these requirements are addressed. If they're not going to include them at all, if they're going to include them, what does that look like? So we've unfortunately not been able to get, you know, really the clarification we need on some of these items.
okay. All right, so it sounds like ongoing discussions on that. Could you talk a little bit about the architecture? I find it very interesting. I'm a fan personally.
Yeah, I have some 3D renderings that will show you, give you a better idea about the intent of the architecture.
I was curious about it looks like there's one window. I mean, one of the things that we kind of look for as a planning commission is that like a transparency into the building for people who are walking by. So there's something of visual interest. And I know there is a window in one section of the building, but then there's another part of the building that is, there's no transparency in. So I'm curious how open you are to, and I also don't know exactly what our transparency requirements are. If it's sort of guidance, or if it's recommendations, or if it's actual requirements that we have.
Well, the design is two towers. One is covered with a stone material that is black, and the other tower is completely white. It's white bricks. And there is a volume on the second floor going through those two towers and overhanging on each side. So that volume is completely glass. It's completely open, but the two towers are enclosed because it's a jewelry store. I mean,
Right, right.
So,
Not really, yes, I understand the vulnerability is something you would be considering.
but I believe it will be a very interesting building in that location, because of its architecture.
You mentioned that you'd have 9 locations. Is the architecture on the others similar to this?
We have pictures of the store we just finished last year in a suburb of Chicago, in Orland Park. And I'm providing some pictures of that store. It's also a freestanding building, and it's similar a little bit to this one.
Let me pass them down.
Yeah, they're here.
Just for people who are
Yeah.
Yeah, we don't have them in a digital format yet.
Those renderings actually address another question I had, which is where the pedestrian entrance is. So it looks like that there's a single door for customers to access from the parking lot?
Yes, there is one from the parking lot, but the main entrance is on West Broad.
Oh, it
And-
is on West Broad.
Yeah, there is a main entrance. It's between the two towers. It's
I
kind
see.
of
Oh,
hidden.
is it recessed?
Yes, a little bit recessed, yes.
I see. Okay. Thank you.
For safety reasons, I don't know if you are aware, but they had several problems in location in the plaza. So they are concerned about safety.
It's
The way it
understandable.
works, there is a camera, and when somebody comes to the door, there is a vestibule. They go through the first door. They have to close the door, so they open the second door for them to get in. So even the parking issue is not really an issue because they don't receive too many people. They receive maximum 4 or 5 people, and unless somebody leaves, somebody else can get in. And usually they come by appointment. So that's why the building is enclosed, and the safety issue was a major issue for the owners.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
There's currently a brick retaining wall that's at the back of the property. Will that remain?
We're gonna demolish part of it because it's going with the curb,
Yeah.
and our design for the parking lot, if we keep that radius, we're gonna lose two parking spaces. So we're demolishing just that curved part, and we're gonna make it square.
Sure.
But the retaining wall will be exactly the same look with the same bricks, same height. It's just we are making it square instead of curved. That will
just-
allow us to have more parking spaces.
Right. Just, a thought that occurred to me as I read through all the documents that since the back of it, it's going to be right next to a retaining wall and right next to an auto repair shop, that kind of
Well,
something I consider in terms of,
Yeah.
your waiver request on the vegetation and so forth. We'll see how it goes, but that certainly was something I was aware of. Probably the biggest issue for me, I was just curious whether staff had any thoughts about discussing alternatives to having the exit with the curb cut onto Broad Street. Since the entrance to the parking lot in the back seems to be two-way, both entrance and exit from the Falls Street location, is there a need really for that exit
Well,
onto Broad Street?
we didn't want to change the pattern of the traffic in the building. It used to be like that. And when it was the bank, you will have more traffic because people will go through the drive-through and they had an ATM machine in there.
Oh, I
So
know,
in
I
the
used to
morning
go by
you
there
have-
all the time.
Yeah, versus now, it's just an exit for customers. They stay 2 hours in the store and then they leave. And we wanted to keep that pattern of traffic.
Yeah, yeah. It's, of course, you know, when that building was built, I don't think we were quite as tuned into walkability and the features streetscape features that both promote and detract from walkability. But certainly, anybody who reads a book like this, Walkable City Rules by Jeff Speck, and he gets into the problems with having curb cuts and so forth, as well as do a number of other authors. So it's just something to think about, I guess, for staff and everybody. Do we really want a curb cut there? And as you say, it's not going to handle a lot of traffic. I mean, maybe there's other reasons why it would be considered to be an asset to your design. But to me, if there's any way not to have that, I think we'd be doing walkability a favor. So just a thought at this point. And that's all I have.
I'll chime in, yeah. I mean, Mr. Stevens stole my thunder on that comment. I think that's completely superfluous. I think that needs to go. When it was a bank, I think Mr. Stevens is exactly right. It was, first of all, it was built at a different time, and it was for circulation for the drive-through. It was the drive-through exit for the bank. We're trying to get away from those types of auto-oriented uses. This is a great opportunity to get rid of that. I mean, and actually, honestly, I know, we're not working with VDOT here, but, if this was outside the city, I can tell you, if you were just a couple blocks up on Leesburg Pike, they would require you to remove that because it takes away an extra opening. It's superfluous. You have, good access on falls, and I think that's what you should do. I mean, you can keep the cantilever design if you like that. I mean, you can still by all means, cantilever that section out from a design perspective, but I think that curb cut needs to go. It serves no purpose. It's a detriment at this point with no added utility. As you said, for your use, which is a low traffic use, there's no reason to have a second exit. It doesn't need it. So that just made the point right there. So I would like to see that gone. And then my only other comment, I'm definitely a fan of modern architecture, and I appreciate that. And I pulled up your picture online of your store in Chicago, and I guess and I certainly also am sensitive to the security issues. I'm aware of the problems they had. I think they had a robbery or one or two at least, armed robbery at that store. So I get all that. But perhaps on the upper level, maybe there's an opportunity, even for the folks who are going to be repairing jewelry up there, maybe they could, have some windows, some glass. I mean, if you look at what Dominion Jewelers built, Dominion Jewelers is a large jewelry store about a block from here. And I'm not saying you have to mimic their style, but if you just look at the amount of glass that they incorporated in what they built, a brand new building within the last 10 years, they have a significant amount of glass, and it just helps the appearance on the street. This kind of, I think, will appear very kind of monolithic on the street. It'll really stand out, which I guess is good for getting people to notice you. But I think as far as creating like a more inviting streetscape, I think it'll appear, kind of fortress-like, and so I think there's a balance between security, but still being able to provide a little bit more transparency, and maybe that means the windows are on the upper level, or just something to break up that massing on that front facade. It's just, it's very monolithic now. There's very little glass at all, and I think, there, jewelry stores, I understand that issue, but, having some display space and some transparency, I think, makes it just more inviting, even for customers. So anyhow, that would be my recommendation on the architecture. To, you don't have to hold. I mean, I like the overall modern look. I mean, we have the Don Bayer up the street, which is very modern. They rebuilt, in a much more contemporary style, and I think it works for them too. But they have a lot of glass, also. So I think things you could do to incorporate more fenestration would be, I think, helpful. And maybe there are ways you can do that while still providing security, like I said, if they're upper story windows, things of that nature. So I would just say consider that as part of your design.
Good thought.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. I echo a lot of what has been said. I do want to say, first and foremost, the thing that we're trying to create in Falls Church is a place of uniqueness. And I think this gives you that, but I think there's something that is missing on the pedestrian level, in that you don't have that transparency. Like, I see those little Tiffany's type small jewel box windows. Like, this building, to me, it looks like a jewel box that you've opened up some drawers. And it seems purposeful, and I'm looking at the plans. I'm an architect by license, and by trade I'm a builder. So I think of all these things, and I can see in the floor plan that you gave us that yes, there's a vault there, and yes, it needs to be fortified. Yes, I understand that, but there's got to be something that we can do on that pedestrian level to bring people in. The Tiffany's style, really tiny windows on the pedestrian level seem too small and too far away from the planting strip, right? You can't get up close. The thing about Tiffany's is you can be right up and look at all those little beautiful things in the window. You can't do that here because you're at least 6 feet away from a planting. And so I would like to see something like that articulate a little bit more. And the slot of space in between that black void, or the black mass and the white mass, is the main entrance, but there's nothing that actually shows us that from the submissions that we've received. So it's a little confusing, the submissions that we received the submission 1, and we received your second submission, and some things are in conflict. And so it's really hard to understand, like, are we supposed to incorporate these two together, or is one superseding the other? And they do have some transparency. There are some windows in here on the floor level.
They had to install bulletproof glass.
Yeah, I know. It's a little expensive. I get it. But I think there's something about, like, people being able to see what's in there adds to that pedestrian experience, to be able to walk down the street and be like, oh, there's something great in there.
Absolutely.
And you can't get to it from the little tiny windows.
Sure.
And you start to see glimpses of it in where you've pulled out that volume on the second floor to expose that full sheet of glass. I think that's beautiful. Like, I really like that. But as a pedestrian walking down the street, you don't see it unless you're across the street, maybe, right? And I think that uniqueness, we want to capitalize to pull people in, right? I mean, that's the point. So, and so when I get to that drive aisle, I was looking at that initial picture on your first submission on the front page, and I thought it was a drive-through jewelry store, because I saw a car coming out and I was like, where's the window so I can order a piece of jewelry and get. So I'm wondering what the need is for that driveway there, since you have an ample parking lot. And I wonder, you've got some issues with the landscaping requirement and trying to fill these buffer requirements and fill the requirements of the internal plantings of the parking lot, that maybe that becomes more garden space. Because as I look at it, you want to try to keep the existing there, but you're going to destroy it in the path of demolition. And in the path of creating that cantilevered space, you're going to have so much equipment there. And the foundation for the bracing for that cantilevered space, that whole driveway is going to be ripped up anyway. So you're going to have to replace it. And it's non-conforming in width, or it's a non-conforming driveway. So you can't replace it with another non-conforming driveway. So it might alleviate a lot of the issues that we're hearing with the waivers to maybe create more of a garden or landscaping space that mitigates some of those other issues. So these are some of the quick things that I was looking at. I really like it. I think it has great potential to be a nice, unique place here. But I want a little bit more of a pedestrian experience there.
Sure, I get it, absolutely. We're going to work on it, and we'll submit the new revised plans.
Work with these guys. They know, they're really good. When they sit down with you, they're really good at kind of teasing it out, right? And making it be mutual.
Absolutely.
Dynamic tension, right? The other thing I wanted to just kind of touch on that I noticed was there was a note in the staff comments, or it was the review comments, not the staff report, that talked a little bit about, I think it was note number 37, and I don't know which, maybe it was the comment responses. And it talked more about like stormwater drainage. And it does actually state, the city states that we cannot handle an increase of flow with regards to the stormwater for the 10-year event, which I do have questions for staff about the 10-year event. But it's unlikely that our sewers are adequate for that. But the response came back is that that you guys are relying upon the city sewer for overflow. So I want to kind of stress, sit down with city staff to kind of work through that issue, because it is kind of a problem that we're trying to address globally across the city. So just another plug to sit down with them.
We'll do that, ma'am.
But I do have a off-site question for staff, is the 10-year event. I think a lot of our events have been more like the 50-year event, and so I'm curious if that's a state requirement, or if that is like, what is the state requirement that we're supposed to be planning to at this stage, knowing over the last 5 to 7 years that we've been seeing these storm events be greater and greater and greater?
Yeah, we can look up the exact number. I mean, it's referenced here in the staff comments that the 10-year storm design requirement is coming out of the city's code in Chapter 35 there, the Stormwater Code. And we can talk to the engineering staff as well as look it up and confirm that telescopes back to a design requirement out of state code. I will say that I think what it's trying to find is a balance of things that are expected to be routine should be able to be handled within the capacity of the system, and then understanding that things that are sort of beyond the routine, it is very expensive to design for things beyond the routine. And so when things go beyond that routine, what you're relying on is sort of overland relief, whether that means, flooding a front yard or flooding a street, but obviously not intending to flood someone's home or basement or a business or anything like that.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Steve?
To your comment, you can continue, but just on that topic, I kept reading in the staff review a BMP. Is there a BMP that's being proposed for this project?
Yes, there is. Yes, there is. There's a bioretention being proposed on the site.
Can you identify yourself, please?
Hi, I'm Gladys Sarah. I'm Sarah Engineer and a civil engineer on the project.
Good. And what is it, underground retention? Is that what it is?
It's a bioretention. It's both. It's two things. It's the permeable pavement where you can see next to the site. You'll see a standard permeable pavement where the standard parking spaces are, and you can also see the bioretention along within the limits of the property, along the property line of the building, and at the front, the entranceway.
So I guess city staff will review that, right, as to whether it can handle the flow and so forth.
Yeah, there's a standard methodology for how to make those calculations, how to review those calculations, and that's obviously what we want to get to.
That's great.
I think we should have, now that we're sitting here, I think, like we said before, having a meeting with the staff to discuss the specifics.
Yeah, and I'll say that that's typical practice as site plans go through the process. It's very common to have these sorts of conversations, before work session, after work session, sort of leading up to sort of whether it's resubmissions or final consideration. These kinds of staff applicant conversations are very common to resolve these kinds of comments.
Makes sense.
Thank you.
Sorry. Phil Duncan had a question.
Mr. Duncan?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It sounds like everyone is in violent agreement, so I don't want to interrupt that at all. I'd just like to second those who've said the pedestrian experience could be improved. I mean, the benefit of the current location of Jeweler there is, although it's a security mess, is that it gives you something interesting to look at when you're walking through the Birch and Broad Shopping Center. And it would be nice to retain some flavor of that in the new building. Unless you can come up with a business model that does have Sharon's drive-through jeweler. I think that would be fascinating. I want to get in on the ground floor of that if I can. I know we've converted a bank to a Smoothie King, but I've never heard about a bank being converted to a drive-in jewelry. But yeah, the curb cut on Broad Street seems unnecessary now. And I guess the only other question I had was the pedestrian accommodations on the street. Falls a little, or name of the street escapes me right now. Crossing from the car wash basically to the jewelry store. Are there any changes or curb cuts or signals or walk lights or whatever planned for those locations? I don't have the materials in my hand, so I have to rely on you all to tell me that.
Did you get the question? Any plans for pedestrian amenities on, I guess it's Falls Ave?
Well,
Yeah, Falls out.
yeah, well, the question was, I mean, the comment was to add a buffer, a planter over there. We have it, but I believe it's not enough, and we're going to work on it. And we
One more
provide-
question. I'm sorry, I interrupted you. I didn't hear you.
It's about the planter on Falls, which is required when you have a parking. You need to put, you need to provide a planter. So we're gonna have to work on that and to provide the
Is there a-
required percentage.
Is there a pet head there? Is there a walk? Oh, I should know, but I don't. I mean, is there a
No, it's
button active?
It's an unsignalized crossing. There are curb ramps there. They're not up to the current ADA standard for materials and the
Oh,
direction of the ramp itself.
I see.
But no, it's not a signalized crossing.
No, it's.
That's what I'm talking about. I don't know. You might give that some thought if you're putting more. I mean, hopefully it'll be a successful business and there'll be more traffic going through there than there was even at the bank. And all the traffic will be going in and out on Falls Avenue. And we're trying to make that a appealing pedestrian experience. It might make sense to have some sort of pedestrian activated signals there that get you across the street, or at least improved lighting, so that in the winter months when it gets dark at 4 o'clock, pedestrians who are walking along that stretch feel like they're visible to cars turning in and out.
Sure, absolutely. We'll work on that.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Duncan. Ms. Sarah, you had something?
There was a comment about the existing building being demoed, but from my understanding, this project is a renovation project,
No,
and they're adding an addition on top.
No, it's demolition, but we are keeping the same exact footprint of the existing building. And we are using 90% of the foundations. And we have a structural study that has been submitted that proves that the current foundation will carry the addition of the second floor. So it's all there in the building submission.
Can I ask a
Correct.
question?
So basically, we are using the foundation of the existing building because the new building has the exact same dimensions.
Can I ask a question?
Yes, ma'am.
From the drawings that we have, it looks like the existing building footprint is a simple rectangle. When I look at the slab foundation of the new building, it is not that anymore. It has
Yes.
shrunken in some locations, it has receded in where that
Yes.
slot is, so it is different.
Yes, but we are using, I said we are using 90% of the foundation, and we are adding some foundations to it.
So
It's a
you're still
combination.
disrupting the
Yes.
foundation,
Yes,
is my point.
yes.
And the definition of renovation by the city code,
No, it's not a renovation, it's a demolition, but we are saving some of the foundation that we are using and adding other foundation to combine the two to support the whole building. And we have done a whole study with all the calculation, and everything has been submitted to building, but it has not been submitted to site. The submission to building has already been done. And they're gonna go through that, and if we have to do any revision, we'll do that.
I would defer to the city inspectors and the city planning staff for what that means, where it falls in renovation versus existing, or versus new, because this doesn't look, it looks a lot new to me.
Yeah, this is what I'm saying. We are just keeping some of the foundation because it's there and it's gonna support the load for the entire building. So we are saving it instead of demolishing the whole thing and make a big hole.
I mean, certainly building safety is going to look at it. They're going to, I mean, read the same technical reports and hopefully come to the same conclusions. But if not, I've seen them push back on reports before. So I'm comfortable that it's going to be a secure building once it goes through building review. In terms of the site plan review, I think the way we would look at a renovation versus a demolition differently would be when it comes to probably evaluating those waivers. If you may remember the Stratford Gardens site plan where they were keeping the existing building, the existing drive aisles, there were mature trees next to them, and so that's a consideration when thinking about waivers and what can you do with a site. When you're starting. When you're taking away the existing building, you've got a lot more flexibility, obviously, in your design, and so we consider that when we're looking at waiver requests and making our recommendations to you. I guess that's the short answer. Is generally we're obviously more favorable to renovations from a waiver perspective. I think you're disrupting impacts on land, on mature tree canopy, on established soils. But when there is going to be a renovation then or a demolition, then we are looking for it to meet the standards in the code.
Understood. I do have a question too. With regards to the city arborist, the tree protection plan identified one of the trees that the root ball is getting, almost half of it is going to need to be cut. So I would really like the city arborist to look at that and determine if that street tree needs to be replaced, in addition with the rest of the landscaping that you're looking at. I noticed that, I understand that everything's still, you're in design development. Totally understand that, and I'm glad that you guys are here so that we can kind of talk about where you're headed, where you are right now, and where you're headed. It would be good information to understand what trees you're proposing. I know that there's a very general note there that says canopy less than 40 feet, but it would be good to know what those are. But I would like the city arborist to take a look at, because I don't know if a tree will survive if you cut that much of its root ball. I have no idea. It could be fine, but I would much prefer to have somebody take a look at that. Can I have a few more items?
Please go.
So getting back to the slot of space that gets into the entry, it would be good to have some signage there to understand, or maybe that it's hard to read it in the materials that we received. And I think this is a nice blow up. That's the main entry from the street.
Yes.
It would be nice to see, and it looks like it's the same material as this flashy metal, steel,
Yeah,
brass.
It's crossing the two.
It'd be
blocks.
good to kind of
Yeah,
announce that a little bit more. Because, again, I don't think anyone sees it even, because it's kind of it's a fast moving road, even though it's 25 miles an hour. People do fly by there and it's 5 lanes, right? So it'd be good to have some kind of announcement that that's your main pedestrian entrance rather than, and it's hard to tell from the drawings what, it looks like it's more focused on the parking lot, which no one is back there except for, I think, the funeral home is back there, right? Like if you go, no, actually it's the tire place, but the funeral home is the next. But no one will actually see that. So it would be nice to see something
Okay.
about what these vault-like spaces are about. But I did note that these pictures that you gave are great. These showrooms, though, have lots of glass.
Yeah.
I understand you're on a pedestrian level, but and I understand the security.
The location here. Location here, they had like 5 robberies in 2 years or something, which is amazing. I mean,
I know. I like to think that wouldn't happen in Falls Church, but you never know. So I
just
understand where you're coming
happened
from.
like 6 months ago.
No, it did happen here.
Yeah, oh, it did happen here. Sorry. Must have missed that in the news cycle. Sorry.
But I got
Blinders
it.
sometimes.
I'm gonna work on it, so we'll be happy with it.
Okay.
I'll work on it.
So I talked about street trees. The ADA sidewalk there, since you, sorry.
Problem.
I'm sorry. The ADA sidewalk at the crossing of Falls Avenue, I don't see anything in the site plans or in any of the civil
We're gonna
civil
add
plans
it.
to make sure that you're meeting that, and you might need to upgrade that, because I don't know the condition of that, since you are upgrading most of the lot. And there was one item, and thank you, everyone, for appeasing me. In the parking lot, you have great material hatching, and on your elevations, you tag everything, but there's no legend in what we received, so it would be good to have that on your next submission.
Okay.
But I had a question about the parking area. You had mostly asphalt, and then there was a hatching on the parking spaces that are closest to the building, and I was curious what that was indicative of.
We'll look at that.
I'm
and
sorry. Go ahead.
Gladys, do you have an answer for that?
No, I just wanted to back up to you saying something about the crosswalk. And I didn't understand. I was trying to figure out what were you talking about?
So there's, I don't know if there's a crosswalk across Falls, or if there's an ADA pathway along that sidewalk along Broad that crosses over Falls Avenue.
Andrea just looked it
There
up.
is a diagonal
There is.
crosswalk.
There's a brick crosswalk
Okay.
there.
We can
Okay.
Yeah,
add
there's an
that.
existing diagonal crosswalk.
Okay, it just wasn't, I was looking at the submission.
Oh, okay, we're gonna add.
I mean, shown on both. No?
No,
It's shown on.
It's just, there's a
Oh, the crosswalk
diagram.
isn't shown. The ramp is shown. I'm sorry.
That's okay, there's a diagram and then there's details, so I was wondering where those details were being used, because it wasn't, it was really hard to interpret between the two submissions, what was
Okay.
superseding what. I was assuming that submission 2 was superseding, but there was stuff missing. So it was really, I was going back and forth between the two to try to piece it together.
Okay.
So I mean, that's all. I think in the next submission, I understand it's all under development, but it would be good to take a look at
Put
those things.
all together, so.
Yeah,
Okay. No problem.
and thank you for letting me
Thank
come
you.
talk so long. I appreciate
Good
that.
responses, good comments. Anything else from any of the commissioners? Mr. Duncan?
Thank you very much. Let me take just a half turn. Since what was raised there in that last conversation is a matter of pretty serious import, the first time I can recall hearing, concerns about public safety influencing architectural design in the city. I don't remember when Dominion did their development, how we treated that, but it causes me to ask, since I'm new to the commission, what role does the police department play in commenting on design of buildings that have highly valuable items in them, whether it's a bank or whether it's a jewelry store, or, is there a place for comment from our police department? Is there access in the building for, the police to get there? I mean, it's pretty serious business saying that we're designing a building around the expectation or the concern based on past experience that there might be, criminal activity going on there. I think that would merit some comment from our public safety folks to make sure that what we're approving, meets the standards.
Sure. Both the fire marshal and the police department are part of our DRC review staff. So they are sent every submission and given the opportunity to comment. There are a lot of times where we don't hear back from them necessarily. So we do, it does require maybe, especially in this case, as you said, it might require an extra, me reaching out to them one more time and just saying, hey, we just want to make sure that everything is square. But they are always part of our review process, yeah.
Right. I think that'd be helpful if the other commissioners think that would be useful. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments? Mr. Stevens?
Just a real quick follow-up on the tree issue and the city arborist to take a look at it. That one street tree that's there already on Broad Street, there have been a lot of trees along Broad Street that have succumbed to leaf scorch. So it would be good if the arborist could kind of assess that tree that's there to see what kind of status it's in, since there's going to be construction going on. If something had to be done, now is a good time to do it, so.
Okay. Well, you've heard a lot of comments from the commissioners here tonight. I think a lot of this is because of the state the application is in, right? That's in early stages here. So I think it's a lot to clarify. I associate myself with a lot of the comments here tonight. We've addressed the things around the parking, the visual appeal. Commissioners already discussed the uniqueness of this being the jewelry store and the safety concerns. It's something I hadn't thought about before. I do like the modernity of it, the modernness of the site. But I strongly agree with the comments around the drive aisle, not necessary, and a detractor for what's otherwise a pretty good design here. The stormwater issue is very important, pedestrian ADA, all that. So I think you've heard a lot from commissioners here. And I think it's helpful to have better graphics next time too, just so we can, not just so we can see things, but as Mr. Krasner mentioned, so the public, people who are looking at it can see it too. There's an awful lot that's going on here, and I think there's some confusion on our end too. So with that, any other comments for the record from the commissioners? Staff?
No, nothing from us. Thank you.
We really appreciate the opportunity to talk about this tonight. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I appreciate your comments. We're going to take care of all that, and next time probably we will address most of these comments and get back to you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Do you mind sending up the photos if you?
Oh, yeah.
They don't belong to us, I don't think.
See you next time. All right, that concludes the work session. So moving on to item 8, information items, planning commissioners' reports. Do you have any reports from the commissioners? Going once? Mr. Stevens.
All right, jump in here. I attended the ESC meeting last week, and Lonnie Marchetti from city staff gave a very nice detailed presentation on the state-required planning effort on the part of Falls Church and all the jurisdictions of Virginia with respect to municipal solid waste. So if anybody has an interest in that, including it covers recycling and so forth. A lot of detail in her report. It was very well done. So if you're interested in that, you can go to the ESC meeting from last week, and it's there on their, it's linked on their documents. So that's it.
Thank you. Others?
Mr. Duncan has his hand up.
Oh, I'm sorry, Mr. Duncan.
Oh, that's fine, thank you. I just wanted to report that I called into the community meeting that they had about Founders Row 2, 10 days, or I guess it's been a couple of weeks ago now. The community meeting consisted of Chad Price, the staffer from the developer, and me. So I suppose that, that sort of lack of participation indicates a certain amount of acceptance of the new things that are going on there. But as we go forward, the next time they have a community meeting, I would just encourage staff to make sure that it's well publicized and whatever channels are available to us. I know it's a developer-run thing, but if we've gotten to the point in Falls Church where everybody agrees on something, that would be extraordinary. The one sort of fact that came out of it was that the condition of the road is around the site seems likely to remain the same through the spring and into some of the summer, which I know is a matter of some concern of folks who live on Southwest and Ellison and that general area. But it's just the way it is because of the utility undergrounding and the sequencing of that. At any rate, it's an opportunity for the next time that they do have a community meeting, just to make sure the community is well informed and can participate if they choose. Thank you.
Good point. Others? Mr. Krasner?
I don't know if it's officially the planner's report, but I did email Mr. Stoddard about it. Other folks may have heard about the greening of Lincoln project, which is progressing apparently on a somewhat of an abbreviated time frame through the design phase this year. And so the City Council got a presentation in January, and there's a town hall scheduled, I think, at the very end of this month, which is coming up soon. So I think it might be on the 28th. But in any event, I recommended to Mr. Stoddard that the Planning Commission have an opportunity. This is a project we've talked about, with the CIP and at other times, and it hits on a lot of things we've been looking at. I know we, previously participated in like the WNOD Trail Crossing project. I think that had a site plan component, which is maybe why we saw that at some point more formally. So I don't know, Mr. Stoddard, if we were going to get that was going to come to us at some point. But I think given that it's looking like because of the grant funding that they're kind of compressed in their design phase, and they're trying not to short circuit the public process. But I just think the more we can offer the public on that, since it affects so many properties directly with frontage on Lincoln. Overall, I'll say I don't know if folks have seen the initial designs. They're actually very good. I mean, it addresses like one of the banes of one of my pet peeves since the moment I moved here was all the telephone poles in the middle of the sidewalk and large utility boxes on the telephone poles in the middle of the sidewalk on Lincoln. It's one of the worst stretches of pedestrian environment we have in the whole city, I would argue, as far as poles in the way and boxes on the poles in the way. So it's going to fix that. So that's fantastic. That's really exciting. And there's other great things about it too. There's stormwater components. I mean, the project, everyone here I think was familiar with the project, but it's kind of grown into something that's pretty impressive. So anyhow, but I think Paul was going to try to get them to get, I guess it's our public works folks who are coordinating that, get them to come and do a work session with us. Is that going to happen, Mr. Stoddard?
Yeah, we can look at scheduling that. And I'll speak to the schedule when I get to my director's report. And certainly for the next director's report, it certainly as a starting point, I'll include the project webpage, the latest presentation that's gone out publicly. Of course, the project team has been engaging with residents up and down along Lincoln Avenue, as well as with the Citizens Advisory Committee on Transportation, the CACT, and the City Council. So they are obviously trying to engage and hear from folks. And you're right that there is a pressure that the funding is related to ARPA dollars, which need to be encumbered before the end of the calendar year.
Yeah.
And in order to encumber, that means you need to get authorization to award. You need to go through a fair bidding process. And that also means you need to have your engineering plans wrapped up. And so there are quite a number of technical steps that need to happen. So there is obviously an interest in hearing from the public. They've been working with various groups for several months. And obviously the intent is to continue doing that while also trying to meet the project schedule for engineering and bidding and award of contract.
Okay. Yeah, I think a work session from us, I think, would be helpful. And it's also another opportunity for the public to hear about the project. I mean, town halls, I'm sure they'll do their best to, advertise it to folks. And I know they've reached out probably to some individual homeowners that are going to be affected specifically, like lose parking spaces and things here and there. There are some areas that are losing spaces as they bump out the sidewalk but in any event, I think it would be great if we could host them. And I think there is time because it's early enough in the year now. There's time to hopefully weave them into our schedule and have them.
Absolutely. And at the project webpage, if anyone goes to Google and searches Falls Church, greening of Lincoln Avenue, it lays out a nice set of sort of guiding principles for the project. One, making it ADA compliant, Commissioner, as you mentioned, that the sidewalk that's there today just isn't enough. So number one, getting it up to ADA requirements. Number two, addressing water quality and quantity requirements. And this really gets to sort of the two streams, it's a water project, two streams that have really brought this thing together. The Planning Commission has been talking about this from an urban design, pedestrian and bicycle safety perspective. The Public Utilities Commission had been looking at it from a water quantity and quality issue, and so they're really merging these things together. So ADA compliance, water quantity and quality, traffic calming, pedestrian safety, enhanced green space and plantings. So really trying to fit all those things together while obviously also minimizing the impacts of the people who actually live up and down along that street. And so trying to fit all those things together into the right-of-way that's available has been a lot of the design challenge to date. So it's, like you said, it is quite an impressive project, both for the number of things it's trying to accomplish as well as the stretch of street that it's trying to improve.
Right, it's like a mile-long stretch. I mean, we don't have that many roads like that, and so it's pretty ambitious, but it's exciting that it appears to be, actually going to happen. I don't want to jinx anything, but it's
well, that's the thing. I mean, that's the thing. When I look at the
looking good.
plans, it's pretty amazing to think about sort of what Lincoln Avenue will become through these
Right.
plans. And I think the risk is if it doesn't meet that timeline, then we already know what it's going to look like. And
Right,
so the idea is, can we move? That doesn't mean we don't comment on it, right? We do review it, and we do comment, and we do improve it. But I think the big vision is, here's the Lincoln Avenue we'd much rather have.
Right, we don't want the perfect to be the enemy of the good. I hear you there, and I think there is a section like at the very corner at West where they're going to need an easement, and so they're purposely like splitting that little section off because that would delay things because they'll need to get an easement from those homeowners, and so so I get you on that. But I just think any opportunity for additional public listening and questions, and I know this commission's again pretty well versed in that. And I think we'll be able to offer some good comments on the plan. So anyhow, I think that would be great.
Absolutely.
Agreed on all that, especially about the utility poles and the sidewalk. Any other comments, Freelander?
Random, but I really enjoy the little marbles in the sidewalk that mimic the
Some
solar system.
kid probably
all the way
some
down.
kid for some project like probably 30 years ago like glued like marbles that represent the planets and to scale, like stretching out like from like the sun to Pluto, from like past my house all the way down to Arlington, like to scale in the curb. Hopefully they may have to take those out. I don't know, have to look at that. Those may have to come out. I don't know because they're glued into the curb.
I know. I wish they could stay.
So I know what you're talking about. I've noticed that. So a couple of planets are missing, but they're mostly there. I encourage anyone to check that out if you're into that kind of thing. It's actually quite cool. You realize how far away Pluto is when you take it to scale like
Didn't
that.
we get rid of Pluto altogether as a planet?
Yeah, it's
It's now a dwarf planet along with
Right.
4 other bodies.
right. Well, it shows you how old that project was, right? Pluto was still a planet whenever this student put that together, but right. So anyhow, but yeah, that is funny that you noticed that too. I think that may have to come out though because they're all that's going to be torn up. But oh well, maybe we can document it before they rip it out. Yeah. Anyhow.
It stays. All right, we're kind of getting into the director's report, so why don't we turn it back over to you, Mr. Stoddard?
Sure. Let me start, actually, instead of starting with the memo report, let me start with the look ahead since we are talking about scheduling. Thank you, Mr. Trainer. Let's see. So you do have a couple busy meetings coming up. I am trying to hold to your rules of procedure in terms of getting you all out of here by no later than 10:30 each night. So really trying to hold to no more than 3 substantive items in a meeting. At your next, and that'll be That'll be a challenge. At your next regular meeting, March 6th, you are scheduled to hold a preliminary board and commission workshop for a new special exception application at the corner of Maple and Annandale. The scheduling of this follows our standard operating procedure. It's scheduled to go to council 2 days before. The invites to the boards and commissions have already gone out. So the format for this would be the same, that there would be a staff presentation, an applicant presentation, and then board and commission representatives would be invited to provide early feedback. Of course, this is early in the process. There's no expectation that boards and commissions have reviewed this in detail. They certainly don't need to come with written comment. This is intended to be sort of keeping as much of the community informed and engaged as early as we can in these project reviews. Second up, you all had asked to revisit your board and commission liaison, so I didn't want to lose that. Mr. Trainer was taking a well-deserved vacation, and so we didn't have it ready for you tonight, but I expect to have it ready for your March 6th meeting. And then your work session on the proposed CIP from staff. Of course, this is a continuation of the work you've done in the fall, identifying those big themes, building on the budget guidance that the council adopted in November, December of last year, picking up the themes from the council retreat and really showing how the CIP can help deliver on one, state of good repair, adequate staffing to deliver things on time, and then those big initiatives that the council wants to move forward. March 20th, the CIP would flip from work session on the 6th to action on the 20th, and this timing is required to hold to the council's budget schedule in terms of presenting a complete budget picture with both operating and budget on a timeline that works for them in order to have a budget in place before the end of the fiscal year or the start of the fiscal year. And then your first work session on a T-zone proposal under the latest T-zone code updates. This would be for a townhouse development at the intersection of Oak and Park. As designed by the applicants, this will meet all of the by right requirements, so it won't be by right plus or a special use permit, no variances. It meets all of the design requirements that you and council had laid out within the zoning ordinance. Let's see, bike plan update. This would be your opportunity to look at, your first opportunity to look at the various cross sections that are being considered. If you remember, there were a series of 5 priority routes identified, and there will be a variety of cross sections shown. These will be the subject of public engagement throughout the month of March with community meetings, pop-ups at the farmers market, an online survey, engagement with the CACT. Things that aren't on this list, but I want to make you aware of, we're also working against a timeline to get the city's floodplain ordinance updated. There are updated requirements from FEMA as well as the state, and the city is obligated to get those in place by the end of the fiscal year in order to hold on to its flood insurance program, which is obviously important for a lot of folks in the community. So staff will be putting together a schedule to get that in front of you, since the floodplain ordinance does exist within the city zoning ordinance. That it's a required city council action following mandatory review from this group. And of course, I'll fit into this some sort of briefing or work session on the greening of Lincoln. Questions on the I know that's a lot, and I want to make sure you guys know what's coming up. Are there any questions on upcoming items?
One item we discussed before was the accessory living units.
Yep.
Yeah, where does that appear, and how are we going to see that?
So what I understand, we've sort of been talking internally, as I understand it, housing continues to be a concern for council. They talked about it at the retreat. I think at the staff level, we're still waiting to see how the work plan itself sort of pans out in terms of what is the priority. And I don't know if part of that might also be waiting to see what happens with the state legislative session, which is scheduled to wrap up shortly. Of course, at the state level, and Virginia is not unique, there are many states throughout the country that are considering what's called state preemption, where at the state level they recognize that in totality, actions of the localities have sort of limited the ability to construct new housing. And certainly Northern Virginia and the DC region is an example of that. And so there is a push at the state level, as I said, is occurring more and more commonly throughout the U.S. to establish minimum density allowances. And in this case, the state's considering minimum requirements for accessory dwelling ordinances. So depending on how that pans out, that could obviously sort of shape or direct the city's own efforts.
We'll say there's some opposition to that, so wouldn't count on that.
No, I'm not expecting
Getting through
it
this
to-
session at all. I mean, a lot of jurisdictions are opposing it just on the grounds of losing local control. I mean, if the state preempts, and we should be careful about that too, not that, I mean, it depends how you view that topic, but we should always be careful, when Richmond tries to, kind of come up with a solution, a blanket solution across the entire Commonwealth. Whatever the topic is, whatever your view is on that topic, we should always be cautious about that because, inevitably Richmond and the delegates who are usually well-meaning and senators, their knowledge of zoning and land use tends to be small to none. So sometimes what they come up with, the cure is worse than the disease. So we have to be careful about that. So I will say that, and I just know there's a strong opposition from a lot of local jurisdictions against, not because they're against affordable housing, but because they're against, or ADUs per se, but just because they're against, Richmond again doing an overreach and taking away local control. But depending how you feel on that issue. So, but there is a bill on the table. Yeah, there is.
As a prompt for action, might not be a bad
Right.
move
Right.
in the right direction.
So I think, I guess the short answer is we're in a bit of a wait and see at the staff level on the council work plan to identify whether we're supposed to move forward with that or maybe put something else. If there does seem to be some sort of delay on that, something else we've heard interest in is, and we've talked about this in the past, is revisiting commercial parking requirements, that there's some flexibility that's granted to the zoning administrator to grant some relief for existing buildings. Right, the idea is can you promote an adaptive reuse of a building versus requiring that everything be torn down? And that could be something that maybe we could revisit and make more clear. Staff has at times been sort of hesitant to use that provision because it's a little bit vague. So I think if we could provide some clarity and say, yes, these are the kinds of actions or the kinds of considerations that should be made so that a new business can move right into an existing space, go through the building permit process, and move right through. We have a lot of flexibility when it comes to site plans to review parking reductions, but at the level of a tenant fit out or a building permit, it gets a little bit more difficult.
We have a busy schedule, but I think there'd be a lot of interest in
Yep.
in dealing with it.
Right, and I think they're all valuable efforts, and I think it might be a question of, maybe we could sneak one in while we're waiting for whether it's the state session or the council work plan to settle out.
Great. One of the
And not
questions-
sneak in the sense of sort of no one knows about it, but in terms of it could be a relatively short item, depending on how it's crafted.
Squeeze it in instead
Yeah.
of sneak it in. Is the Oak Park development, does that replace the daycare proposal we had before?
Yeah, so it's a different applicant. As you may remember, the Young Group was the applicant on the Oak, when it was the proposed daycare. They're no longer the applicant on the property. It's now Madison Homes, which is a townhouse builder that's active throughout the area, and they've done a number of townhouse projects on sites of this size and scale.
Thank you.
So if there are no questions on scheduling, I'll move to the written report, just to highlight what's in there. So there are two things to kick off, and they're somewhat related because they're obviously both land use related. The first is the mixed use report card. I wanted to make sure the Planning Commission had the latest. This is typically gets produced every 2 years, and this is done with the Economic Development Office with support from the Assessor, Commissioner of Revenue, and other offices throughout the city. But it's a look back at what mixed-use projects have been built going back to the Broadway, and how have they fared in terms of what was projected and what were the actuals. Some key things, I think, to take away, if you remember when special exceptions and mixed-use projects got their start in the city zoning ordinances, one of the primary drivers was how can this promote economic development within the city? That was the principal driver. The city knew its commercial buildings were aging. They were having a hard time renovating them, a hard time redeveloping them, and the city wanted to promote economic development. And if we're able to jump to the attachment, and we're going to have to do quite a bit of zooming in order to fit the text in. The font gets quite small. But if we can zoom in and jump maybe to the bottom row. Just a couple things that I want to note. There should be a number 22.83 acres It's just coming onto the screen now. That's the total amount of land that has been developed under these mixed-use projects that are listed in the chart, 23 acres. Looking back at the uses that were on those sites before, if you go three columns to the left, you'll see that the total tax receipts from those uses prior to redevelopment was $970,000. That was the gross tax intake. Post-development, the gross tax is $12.1 million, the next column over. And then on the far left is the net of $4.5 million. So that's $4.5 additional million that are coming in net of city expenses. So in terms of the original intent of economic development, I think there are a lot of positives to talk about in terms of tax revenues. If you go over a couple columns to the right, the total amount of new commercial square footage that's been delivered is over 400,000 square feet of new commercial space, bumping it up to a commercial FAR of 0.37. And then in the column on the right, it's talking a lot about the other community benefits that have come along with these projects, whether that's school capital, affordable housing, or other urban design and streetscape improvements. So that's the mixed-use report card. I don't know if there are any questions on that. I know it only comes out every 2 years, so.
Questions or comments?
And then the other thing we were polling, this is the second attachment. This is credit to Zoe LaRive on this one. This is who does a lot of our data and research for us. She's running a lot of our demographic numbers now, and she's able to pull together a lot of these numbers in pretty short order. This map is charting sort of the pace of development of single-family houses, so everything outside the planning opportunity areas. If we're able to, let me introduce this chart. So if you can see the color coding in the legend on the right, this is breaking down construction activity, again, in single-family houses into 20-year increments going back to 1900. And if, Jack, if you're able to zoom in on the chart in the upper right. So this chart is plotting two things at the same time. As soon as I get the legend back, the green bars, the light green bars, are a tally of how many parcels were developed or how many homes were constructed, and that's the axis on the left. And you can see construction activity really peaked in the 1940s and 50s, and that makes sense with development patterns in the region. That's when the Capital Beltway was being constructed and when suburbanization was moving out beyond Arlington. And then in the 60s and 70s, 60s, 70s, 80s, suburbanization moved past Falls Church into Fairfax County, ultimately Loudoun County, and Prince William County. And then you can sort of see the corresponding drop in activity, and then you can see the uptick beginning again in the early 2000s in Falls Church. And a lot of that is emblematic of the teardowns or people finding sort of small spaces where they could split a single lot into two. And the axis that's on the right is the acreage of land that's been involved with this activity, and you can see that it's over 100 acres of land that was involved in single-family construction post 2000. I think I had the exact acreage. 110 acres of land and 532 homes in that 20-year period from 2001 to 2020. And I thought it was interesting, and it sort of tells a story about sort of what's going on in terms of housing price, what might be happening to some of the older home stock, which, while more modest, is certainly more affordable, but also what's happening to the urban forest. Some of these older homes that were constructed in the 40s and 50s have some of the biggest trees on them, and if those are the ones that are at risk of tear down, what does that mean for the city's urban forest and its environmental goals going forward? So I don't have any answers, but I have information, and I thought it was sort of interesting to put forward. And I certainly wanted to make you all aware of it as we had it on hand. I'm happy to pause for discussion and questions here.
Thank you. Comments, Ms. Freelander?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I do have a question. How much, I'd be curious, from the spike in the 40s, from the 40s to the 60s, how much of that is recently redeveloped in the last 20 years? And how much of, like, how much, are we looking at 2/3 of the acreage that could be redeveloped? Is that the assumption? Is that 2/3 and that 1/3 is already part of this spike from 1941 to 1960? In terms of clear cutting acreage, getting rid of the canopy, right? And maybe replacing it with new trees, maybe not. You know, in terms of sustainability and moving forward with how are we going to get to our targets for, you know, so I'm curious what these other what this bar in the last 20 years represents in terms of, were those the older properties, or were these are all single-family homes, but were those older properties, or were those properties that weren't older properties that were probably maybe in the 80s or late 80s, 90s?
I think there's an anecdotal answer. If we're actually able to zoom back out in the map, I think you can see. So the yellow boxes are the 2000 and beyond development activity. And so you can see in some cases they are clustered. For example, the split lots along Lincoln Avenue, or where you can see maybe there was sort of a large subdivision of a cul-de-sac. So there was probably one older home that came down. But you can also see a sort of a sprinkling of yellow boxes throughout Greenway Downs, north of that. Is it the Fowler edition? And so you can see a lot of sort of sprinkling of these yellows. And I think where you see the sprinkling, that's most likely a tear down, or it may have been an undeveloped lot that someone was able to make use of. I think the longer answer is we could go back and add a bar showing how many of those homes, you know, weren't later torn down. So we could do a little bit of subtraction and
Just
show
to
those
kind of
numbers.
see, are we really looking at 300 acres? Are we looking at 200 acres?
Of
Are we
what's
looking at,
remaining.
you know, of what's remaining to, and how do we, I mean, it's private land, right? So how do
Right.
you incentivize keeping that canopy?
So one of the things we've talked about is that right now it can actually be quite difficult to reuse an existing structure. So for example, if you're looking to expand family, we were talking about it earlier tonight, that the rules on accessory dwellings are pretty limited, so it's difficult to build one with certainty. Similarly, a lot of the homes in the city are non-conforming, whether that's because they're, you know, corner lots and those rules changed, or because they were built before zoning was put in place, and now they're non-conforming for front yard, side yard, whatever the case may be. So there are extra steps involved when you're trying to reuse a home versus when you're starting with a blank slate and just bringing it up to code. So I think there are some things you could look at in terms of the flexibility of do we grant flexibilities with the same administrative ease as a new home construction?
I mean, that's a good point. I mean, as a builder, like, and I'm not in the residential, but I understand the numbers of that, right? And it's cheap to go as big as you can, because you can command a higher price at the end of the day for very little extra risk in the front. But I would be curious to see what other jurisdictions that we want to mimic that still have canopy, like Portland, places in California. How do they deal with this? So that they can still, they've incentivized it somehow. People are able to put on additions. And part of the problems with additions is there's a lot of issues that might be less than ideal with that house. It might have been chopped up at so many renovations that it's no longer useful. And that's kind of what we found when we were looking. We did a renovation interiorly, but you know, our neighbors have done both tear downs and other neighbors have done renovations. And the renovations, it is tricky because there's a lot of other existing conditions that are unknown that you have to work around that inevitably could cost more, depending what your needs are and where you want to go with your addition. So I think it would be interesting to kind of see what other jurisdictions that have successfully maintained a tree canopy while they've undergrown growth. And I don't know what those would be. I mean, places in Oregon come to mind, places in Northern California come to mind only because there's a lot of private tree canopy that's existing. So it'd be good to look at that rather than recreate the wheel a little bit, and maybe look and see what might work for our area versus what won't.
I was just going to chime in. I mean, Mr. Stoddard in the past has, I know the city has a map, and maybe, Ms. Freeland, I don't know if you've seen it before, that also tells the other side of the story here. It's the mismatch between the value of the land and the house that's on it. And so the tear down phenomenon, it's not unique to Falls Church. It's really a Northern Virginia. It's not unique to Northern Virginia, but it certainly is very prevalent here because of the unique history of this region, where you had large swaths of homes that were built, as that map shows, the chart shows, mostly after World War II. If we broke that down into 10-year periods, you'd see that the majority of those homes were being built like late 40s up to 60, like not during the war. No one was building houses during the war. And so, but they were built. They were very modest. They were built for returning servicemen. They were built for people working at the Pentagon, for civil servants. And then for many different reasons, the DC area has become, significantly more affluent. You have much more, higher paid professional positions that as the DC complex of defense contractors and lawyers and everyone else grew. And so places like Falls Church and our adjacent parts of McLean and North Arlington that were initially developed in a much more modest way, now you have the land that is so valuable that houses that were built for, a blue-collar worker, well, now that's in a location that a very wealthy partner at a K Street law firm wants to live there. And they're not going to renovate the little salt box brick house that was there because the lot's big enough that it could accommodate more. And so it's dual factor. So, I don't know if the answer is preventing, if we can completely change that trajectory, because it's kind of the legacy we've kind of inherited with the housing, some of the older housing stock that just, some of it is, I don't want to say obsolete, but there's some that just, the economics don't work to renovate, for some, based on how expensive the lot is. Just to buy the land. So it's a complicated issue. But that map that I know the cities you've provided before, Paul, that kind of shows like the, houses that are sort of vulnerable to that, to being torn down, because the mismatch between the assessed value of the house versus the assessed value of the lot is so extreme. And that is why in other parts of the country, that is somewhat extreme here. You don't always see that. I mean, the reason there are so many teardowns here is for that exact reason. In other neighborhoods and other parts of the country, that mismatch isn't as prevalent, so you won't see as many teardowns. People are more likely to build an addition than start from scratch because the house isn't considered to be, obsolete. So anyhow, just my 2 cents on the matter, but there's a lot of factors at play. But it is interesting to see. It'd be interesting even if you broke it down differently to look at, sort of how, a neighborhood, and it's hard to draw like one geographic area of the city is more vulnerable than the other. I mean, honestly, you see the yellow is everywhere. The stretch on Lincoln, that was kind of where I live, was kind of a unique thing because the city did sunset the provision for split lots. And so that forced the hand of owners there. It was kind of like now or never as far as selling and letting it redevelop or not, So that's why that has that concentration. That's a unique factor that was at play in the Ellison Heights subdivision, but you can see that it's everywhere throughout the city because in general, the original housing stock that was built here was much more modest compared to what, the high income, families that want to live in this area are looking for today. So it's just, there are big picture trends that, we're all sort of, subject to. But anyway, that's my 2 cents on the issue. But it's a great map. It's very interesting to see the data. We all kind of intuitively know it living here, but when you see it, you do see like how prevalent it is, and it will continue. I mean, people who are in that business, we know the builders that specialize in the teardowns, and I think they realize there's almost, I don't want to say an unlimited supply, but the number of original 1940s, 50s, 60s homes, they view all of those as potential. So I think that. It's hard to imagine changing that market dynamic, but the tree issue is a different issue as far as requiring, it's so easy for them to tear down and scrape the lot, and get the tree, and then, and just plant new to get the credit, through the tree preservation, because in their mind it's always easier and cheaper to do that. It's not impossible to save good trees, but I think our current ordinance doesn't really prioritize that. It allows them to mean, we do have a preservation target, but it allows them to, it's very easy to get rid of that. So I don't know. Everyone struggles with it in the region.
Specific to trees, I think that's something we've talked about sort of in the hallways as staff, is could we build in an administrative relief, whether it's on a front yard, a rear yard, or a side yard setback, if it were for the purposes of getting, the same building envelope out of the critical root zone. Right now, the only way to move your building envelope would be to request a variance. And so again, what are the public policy goals, and can we write tools to make it sort of easy for people to do those things?
Mr. Duncan?
Fascinating stuff. Love those maps. I have a housing question, but before I forget, I wanted to go back briefly to net fiscal impact. Paul, you said the number was 4.3 million. This was always a question I had when I was involved with the Economic Development Committee of Council, which is what does that translate into in terms of the tax rate? $4.3 million equals what? 8-10%. Anyway, the point is, every time we present this chart, I know it's got a lot of tiny little numbers on it, but in order for it to mean something to the average person, they need to be able to say, well, all this development that I'm having to put up with is saving me, pick a number, $600,000-$800,000 a year, or somewhere in that vicinity, and I like that, or I don't like that, whichever way you go. At least providing that information was always a little difficult for me to extract, and I would just encourage the Planning Commission to use its powers to get that information out into the public, maybe a little bit more than it has been. My question about, that's not really a respond now, just an observation. The question about housing goes to the affordable, designated affordable component of housing stock here. Do we feel like we have a good grasp? I mean, I've sat through a lot of meetings of the Housing Commission and the various other groups that are involved in affordable housing, and I still don't feel like I have a really good grasp of how many units do we have, how many units have we gained in the last, 10, 20 years, how many have we lost, not trying to be too broad with the question, but specifically designated affordable dwelling units. And what have we got coming up, in the very near future in the new developments? Again, making people aware that there is action in this area. It may not be as much as some people want, but setting some targets and goals that we can actually aim for. For instance, we've spent, a good bit of time talking about, other things, but the Virginia Village project has been talked about, the EDA and other places. A multifamily dedicated affordable housing building is something that, a new building that we've not paid a lot of attention to. And one way to hit our targets, or at least make some progress, real progress on affordable housing, would be to concentrate our efforts on a building like that, in addition to saving the fields. Do we feel like, in conjunction with the Housing Commission, that we have access to that information, and can we present it in a way that the public could grasp it?
There is annually, city staff publishes and credit to the Housing and Human Services staff on the report. So annually, they tally and publish a report called the Affordable Housing Report. I can get the latest and include it in the next director's report. I know their publication comes out around the beginning of the year, so I might want to wait for the latest versus using last year's numbers. But that does keep a tally of the designated affordable units, what's come online, what might be at risk of expiring soon, and then obviously we can add to that the projected numbers for the projects that are under construction.
Does it also include market rate affordable? Because I remember seeing other reports in the past, I think, that did have those numbers, which were dwindling, maybe even faster.
Yeah, I don't know if it's on that same regular cycle or whether it's ad hoc, but they do, I know, survey existing apartment buildings that are market rate to try and keep to try and stay aware of what are the going market rates or rental rates in the city. I can ask for the latest on that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I had a comment.
Please.
I thought it was notable. I'm glad you put these two things in the director's report. I have some mixed feelings about the way we're thinking about the mixed-use report card. Obviously, like, I think mixed use brings a lot of benefits, but I don't think fiscals are necessarily the only thing that we should care about as a community, the only reason to be building these projects. There are a lot of other benefits that can come out of it. And I think when we value the fiscals above everything else, like it may be driving us to build a certain kind of housing that is maybe not as inclusive as what we could be building. Though maybe the market doesn't want to build it anyway. Anyway, sorry, that's all just an aside. But one thing I noted in that report card is the total acreage developed with these projects, which probably what was the Broadway, 2004, 2006? Was that the earliest? There are actually no dates on here, which might be a helpful thing to add in the future.
2000, I think it came online. It was approved in 2001, and I think it opened in 2003 or so.
Yeah, that sounds right to me. But if you look at, so similar time period for the single-family home analysis that we did, but if you look at the acreage for these commercial developments, these mixed-use developments that we've done, it was what, about a total of 23 acres? And over the same period of time, with the redevelopment that's happening in our single-family neighborhoods by right, we have about 110 acres. Was that the number? So I guess I just want to note that, I think that there's a lot of angst in the community when these projects come about what the impact is going to be on our canopy and concern about trees. I would say, like, in some cases, these are buildings and parking lots and there are no trees there to begin with. So, I think it's notable that we've had like 5 times more development in our residential neighborhoods by right, where presumably these lots are being scraped and trees are removed. Maybe that's not the case in all of them, but it's a case, we all see that, right? That's not an uncommon thing to see when these lots are redeveloped. So just something that I wanted to point out, a bit of a disconnect maybe between how the development that's happening in our residential neighborhoods is perceived and how the development that's happening with these multi-family projects in commercial areas is perceived.
That's a good point.
The last item in the report, this was, you all requested that this be included in an upcoming meeting packet. I know the bike plan isn't scheduled to come to you until an upcoming meeting, but I did want to include this in here. This is the report card. Credit to members of Bike Falls Church who submitted the application to the League of American Bicyclists, which is a nationally run organization which upon application, reviews biking infrastructure, policies, funding, education that are present in those communities and gives them a rating. Nearby jurisdictions have been rating very well in past years. I think I recorded some of them. Here we go. So Arlington, Alexandria, Fairfax, respectively, earned ratings of gold, silver, and bronze in their most recent evaluations. In this application, Falls Church received an honorable mention. And with the application, the response includes not just the rating, but also a rundown on various categories when it comes to planning and implementing bicycle-friendly policies and projects. So the full report card is included in your report. I won't walk through it in detail, just to state that there are a variety of program areas and they're available for your review and input.
This was so great. I really love this report card, and I'm very grateful to Big Falls Church for submitting the application. I know that's actually a fair amount of work. So there were 2 recommendations that I wanted to ask about, like maybe in the context of the CIP. One of them was to install automated bicycle counters. Is that something that, I have no idea what the cost of those things are, but is that something that we could consider as a future CIP project?
It is well, it's funny that the automated bicycle counters are sort of one of the lost, one of the forgotten items out of the WNOD master plan. That is something that we included back when we were working on that plan. We had field visits with contractors. The numbers now would be out of date, but it would be somewhere between sort of tens of thousands of dollars, and they're typically wired into automated counters if you buy the right software. At least this was the case 10 years ago. Arlington has a website where they just constantly refresh that data. We had talked to the Arlington County staff back at that time, and they were willing to publish our data on their website so that it would be visible. It can be published. You can also see the stand-up counters. I assume they still have it up in Roslyn, where you can see the number of people who have passed by, sort of a
just
strength in
replaced it.
numbers idea. Oh, well, there you go.
New generation of equipment already.
Yeah. So I think it's a great item. It's not necessarily an expensive item, and if it is something that's off the shelf and something that another community is already using, that could make it relatively easy.
Okay, great.
In comparison to other things to install.
So maybe we don't even need to put it in there. The other thing, in the context of the bicycle master plan that we're currently working on, was the recommendation that they had for bicycle education programming. Is that included in the updated draft of the master plan, that bicycle education sort of as a strategy, either through the schools or through some other means? Because that was something we've scored really poorly on as a community.
It is. So on the heels of the first bike plan, we staff had organized several biking events, bike education classes with WABA, and we had scheduled a number of events. We found that the turnout was pretty limited, and so we put that on pause. But I think there is renewed interest in the community, and I think it would be great to restart that. So I think it's a combination of adult education, youth education, right? It's common in other countries that biking is just taught in the schools, just like any other sort of routine activity. Some countries do transit education, and they teach kids how to ride the bus, right? It's not an intuitive skill when you look at a bus map and you try to figure out how to pay your fare. So it is, but I think it is a lifelong skill. And so I think that is something we could look at sort of coming out of this bike program.
Have there been conversations with the schools on whether it would be possible to start some sort of bicycle education? I know members of Bike Falls Church have also been doing kind of little traffic gardens for schools, like on a volunteer basis, but the schools don't have any kind of official programming.
There is a high school bike club. I think we actually have one of their photos in our draft annual profile. And I know we did some tabling at the schools related to the bike plan in terms of identifying priority routes. So I think there are some connections there. I don't know what the exact status is on education, but it's something we could look at.
Okay. That's it.
Any other comments on that? Anything else from the director?
That concludes my report. Thank you.
The sign of a good map is one that generates discussion and ideas, so that certainly did that. Any other correspondence then? Okay. Anything else from the commissioners? Any other comments? Mr. Duncan?
Could I just ask Mr. Trainer if he could save the public copies of the materials from tonight's meeting, and I'll try to snag them when I get back to Falls Church next week. Thank you.
Sure thing.
Okay. With that,
Thanks for letting me back remotely. I appreciate it.
Okay. Okay, we are adjourned.
Okay. Good night, everybody.
Good night.
Good night, Phil.